By now, I think everyone knows about Blizzard's up and coming add-on changes, which depending on who you ask, ranges from a complete disaster to add-ons were always bad and this is going to be great. As always, the truth is somewhere between those extremes. But I have seen a lot of misunderstandings about what is happening. So I want to take you through roughly what is happening and how it will affect your user interface in Midnight. As well as doing content creation, I also contribute as a developer to the WoW Pro add-on. So I have quite a bit of familiarity with how add-on development actually works and the changes that Blizzard are introducing. Now, before I go any further, Blizzard have been making changes based on feedback from the add-on community, and I suspect that even more changes are to come. So this video is more of a summary where things stand right now than how things will be when Midnight launches. Because by the time the pre-patch does go live, I have no doubt that at least some of the things I discuss in this video will have changed quite a bit. But first of all, let's take a look at why Blizzard are doing these massive changes. Pretty much going all the way back to vanilla, players have sought out every possible way to make achieving their goals, especially clearing raids and more recently doing Mythic Plus, easier and faster. And this has always included utilising add-ons. And from time to time, those add-ons have crossed the line into automating aspects of gameplay. Probably the earliest example of this was decursive in vanilla, which was able to auto-dispel, something that was blocked by Blizzard going into Burning Crusade. Since then, of course, there was the famous map solver that was used in Warlord of Draenor's Archimonde encounter, and more recently, auto-roll assigners in raiding. If you listen to the most reactionary anti-add-on people out there, you'd be left thinking that add-ons play the game for us. But let's be clear, that's simply not true. Those examples that I gave where add-ons did start to cross that line have been very rare indeed over World of Warcraft's lifetime. In fact, it generally only happens maybe once every 2 to 3 expansions, and when it does, Blizzard takes them down quickly. But at the same time, add-ons do provide a lot of assistance to players, even when they do stay strictly within the bounds of just showing information. In Mythic Plus, nameplate add-ons can use colour coding to tell us which ads need interrupts, or they can colour code enemy attacks, and of course Omni CD allows us to track our entire group's cooldowns, and that's before we get into the infamous boss mods like DBM and Bigwigs, which can tell tanks when to taunt or when we should all run away. But at the end of the day, all that is showing us information that we'd otherwise be getting from guides and having to hold in our heads during the fights. So to argue that that is playing the game for us is frankly ridiculous. But at the same time, it does massively reduce the mental load in us as players. And that is especially the case for the more average and below average of us. What this means is that in order to maintain the same level of challenges, that is, for example, for raids to take as long as they used to clear, then Blizzard have been forced to ramp up the difficulty overall. For many years, the official line has been that raids in Mythic Plus are not built with add-ons in mind, and this is arguably true at lower levels, such as normal raiding and maybe up to +8 keys, and possibly even heroic or +10 keys for stronger players. But once you head into Mythic raiding or very high keys, let's be honest, you do need add-ons. And the problem with that, of course, is that it does trickle down to the wider player base. Even when I started playing in Legion, I fairly quickly got the message that DBM was a must-have for raiding. And by the end of Battle for Azeroth, the same was very much true for weak auras, both in raiding and Mythic Plus. From the perspective of a brand new player, World of Warcraft is a huge and complex game, and having to figure out how to install add-ons is very intimidating. Back when I was a new player, it took me a few months before I got over my own reluctance and installed the TomTom add-on. Blizzard have very clearly been doing a fresh push to woo new and returning players, and they very likely see wiping out that narrative that combat add-ons are required as a mandatory part of the game, as an essential part of achieving that goal. But at the same time, Blizzard will also be very well aware that doing that by simply making the game easier will not be enough to remove that peer pressure to use add-ons. And so here we are. But what exactly is it that Blizzard are doing? Well, the announced plans focused on some major improvements to the built-in user interface. Improvements that are desperately needed. Again, when I look back to my own new player experience 7 years ago, the default user interface felt dated, and the player health frames were awkward to use, and those power and mana displays were super confusing to me. But these user interface improvements are being accompanied by the announcement that combat add-ons will be restricted, along with a promise that visual customization in open world add-ons like quest helpers, auction house add-ons and the like would be unaffected. At the time of the initial announcement, I think that most people assumed that this was a very long-term plan. But just a week or so later, game director Ian Hazzikostas did an interview with PC World where he hinted that it could be as soon as Midnight. And now, of course, with the launch of the alpha for Midnight, we know that faster pace has indeed turned out to be the case. The biggest surprise though, and I think the source of much of the backlash, has been the scale of the restrictions that emerged on the alpha. As many of us expected, access to the in-game combat log and the ability for add-ons to use chat to communicate between players was removed. But that wasn't all. Blizzard also introduced a new secret value system that effectively blocked add-on access to almost all player ability and enemy NPC information. Now, this system was sold as allowing add-ons to still pass those secrets into other parts of the API, which would enable us to still put visual skins on some of that combat information. But in reality, the changes were much stricter than that description would lead you to believe. It very quickly emerged that many non-combat add-ons had also been destroyed. This included the ability to create break timers in Raid to see profession progress and even access the Vigor bar during skyriding. Now, it is important to say that not every open world add-on was completely wiped out, but many of them looked like they were. Unsurprisingly, this did trigger a bit of a massive backlash from add-on developers, many of whom understandably felt quite a bit misled. And within 24 hours of the first Midnight Alpha, the developers of Hekili and War Auras both announced that they would not be supporting Midnight. And just this last weekend, the developers of LVI have also announced that they will not be able to support Midnight. Blizzard did commit to taking feedback from the add-on community, along with ensuring that as many add-on developers as possible did get alpha access, and true to their word, they have been acting upon that feedback. Already, we've seen relaxations in add-on communication restrictions, which will now only apply in combat or during a Mythic Plus key. Something that will enable those break timers and loot console add-ons to exist. And this has been followed up with a further round of relaxations, where many of the secret values are now only secret in combat. These changes have successfully unblocked some non-combat and open world add-ons. For example, skywriting add-ons should now be able to track our new skywriting charges. But for combat add-ons, the news is still very different. With access to information as simple as player ability cooldowns, buffs and debuffs effectively blocked in combat, many add-ons that we have become used to using, like Omni CD, or the Plater add-on's ability to color code enemies, or even just an action bar skin that can improve how ability cooldowns are shown, are completely gone. And the War Auras developers have confirmed that the relaxations do not go anywhere far enough to make even a cut down version of War Auras viable in their opinion. But at the same time, both Bigwigs and DBM have shared proofs of concept where they can convert the new built-in boss timeline into their traditional timer bars. And a new nameplate add-on called Platinator has demonstrated that thankfully color coding nameplates based in tank threat is still viable, as is reskinning nameplates to make them a lot more readable than even Blizzard's improved nameplates in Midnight. And the very popular War Aura head-up display developer Luxthos has been working on reskinning and customizing the new cooldown manager. And there is likely more to come from add-on authors. The add-on community is collecting some directed feedback around how the new restrictions are impacting user interface replacement add-ons to try and figure out what the current blockers are. For example, what things will need to be relaxed to enable reskinning action bars and raid frames. And I do think that this feedback process is likely to bear some more fruit. But at the same time, Blizzard, I think, does have a line that they will not be prepared to cross. And that line does mean that not everything that add-on creators or the wider community is calling for will actually be delivered in Midnight. And of course, on top of that, the clock is ticking towards the release of Midnight, and there's going to be a point where Blizzard, and indeed even add-on creators, will run out of time and will have to postpone some desired changes until later in the expansion. So what does all of this mean for your user interface at the start of Midnight? Well, the very short answer is this is going to look very different to how it does now. But how different will depend on how many add-ons you currently use. In all honesty, I'm finding it very difficult to see how a version of Weak Auras could be viable in this new world. Now, to be sure, there are some non-combat Weak Auras out there. Think things like Dragon Riding UIs, experience bars, and stat displays, but they were never Weak Auras' core function, and those can be very easily converted to standalone add-ons, and some of the add-on authors are already doing this. Likewise, I'm very confident that the old school rotational helpers like Hekili will be no more, which is very likely why Blizzard felt it was necessary to create their own version. Looking at boss mod add-ons like DBM and Bigwigs, and they are going to survive, and for many of us, they're going to feel very similar to what we have right now, albeit they will now have to make do with just the information that Blizzard wants to share with them, so there'll be no more adding chat bubble emotes or auto setting markers on players. Nameplate add-ons are going to survive, especially the more minimalist ones, and for tanks who are worried about tracking threat, this is going to be a non-issue. Blizzard are not restricting access to threat information, but the much more advanced features like color coding enemies based on how dangerous they are, or even if they just need an interrupt, is going to be gone. And this was one feature that Blizzard specifically called out as a problem in some of their interviews. And so that is a restriction that I do not see changing at all. Currently, shortening names in a useful and readable way, a very popular plugin feature for Plater, is also not viable, but given that, frankly speaking, the built-in name shortening runs counter to Blizzard's own goals about improving readability, I am not ruling out this particular restriction being relaxed, or at least becoming a built-in feature. OmniCD is also, I suspect, going to be another casualty. There is an ongoing proposal from the community to get access to personal cooldowns and buffs and debuffs, but OmniCD also needs access to other players' information. And again, this is something that Blizzard have specifically called out in that interview. And I think there is frankly zero chance that they will move at all on enabling the things that OmniCD would need. Now, looking at raid frames, and I'm not aware of anything out there that would suggest that the developers think things like sell and heal bots are a problem. But nevertheless, I am a bit pessimistic here. And if you're a healer, I would recommend taking a look at click casting or mouse over macros until we find out what, if anything, Blizzard do plan to do with those raid frames. Because even if those add-ons will still be able to reskin the frames, I suspect that the days of them highlighting dispellable debuffs are no more, unless Blizzard choose to do that themselves. And what about action bar add-ons and other user interface replacements? Well, this is an area where the least certainty currently lies. Currently, action bars will not be able to display cooldown sweeps, nor will they be able to add glows, or indeed even suppress the built-in ones that come from Blizzard. But I do think that there is a decent chance that something will change on that front. And Blizzard have been working on some technology that will hopefully allow us to colour health bars based on low health, and that may even possibly be added as a built-in user interface feature. For open world add-ons, the future is quite bright looking. There are still quite a few that are currently impacted, and there are even more that will perhaps lose some non-essential functionality. But for the most part, as long as they can do their stuff out of combat, they will end up being fine. So expect your questing guides, auction house add-ons, rare scanner, and the like to be just fine. At least eventually. And that thought leads me in to talking about the day one pre-patch experience. I think that we're all used to logging in on a pre-patch to find a ton of user interface errors and quite a few broken add-ons, which we end up having to disable for a day or two until the add-on developers manage to update them. And of course, there's always that one add-on that has been abandoned by its author and never gets fixed. This time around, I'm expecting that effect to be much worse than usual. Pretty much every single add-on that has not had an update is going to be broken. And while the more active developers will have those updates ready in time, I suspect that many less active creators who maybe just log in for the first time in 2 years a week before the pre-patch launches are going to get caught out. So I personally expect that this pre-patch is going to be at least as messy user interface wise as was Dragonflight's, where the user interface update did catch a lot of those add-on creators out. But I also expect that the fixes from the add-on developers who are caught out will be a lot slower in coming as they get to grips with what is quite a complex new system. And unless you're very much a minimalist in your add-on usage, then for sure quite a few of your add-ons are not going to survive the process. And this time around, there probably aren't going to be any viable replacements for them either. I pretty much always take screenshots of my add-on bars before the pre-patch launches, mainly in order to be able to cope with any ability reworks. But this time around, I'm also strongly recommending that in advance of the pre-patch you disable all add-ons and make good use of edit mode to set up a backup using the default user interface. It's unlikely that we'll end up with 0 working add-ons in pre-patch day, but there are going to be quite a bit of uncertainty about what and what will not be working, so I do think it will be good to be prepared so that you don't end up spending your entire first play session trying to recover from the smoking ruins of your user interface. And if there are any add-ons that are particularly important to you, I do recommend checking out if the add-on authors have a social media presence or a Discord that you can start tracking for important updates. Getting an early read will free up time to find replacements should it become necessary. And if you're a big user of weak auras, I do recommend doing an audit to see if you also use any non-combat weak auras that you would want to be retained, as I suspect many of those will be getting new add-on replacements and you'll likely want to get those replacements installed before the pre-patch day. One thing that is very important to say though is that for the most part Blizzard have been making some very massive improvements to the default user interface tools. The cooldown manager and even the new default nameplates do still, at least in the alpha, require a bit of work, but Blizzard are doing that work. And so unless you're hyper resistant to change, I do think that your user interface will turn out perfectly fine, at least if you're not a healer. My own personal biggest worry is the state of raid and party frames. The built-in versions are perfectly usable to be sure, but for players who use sell or heal bots, they are going to feel like quite a massive regression. And for less capable healers who have perhaps relied over much on tools like heal bots and sell to tell them when to dispel, they are going to find that adjustment even harder. And anything that could lead to fewer healers, especially in the pug world, is going to have a knock-on effect on all of us. Thankfully, Blizzard just last week did finally announce that they do have some plans to update the group frames, offering a lot more customization options, along with better highlighting of important, think dispellable buffs and debuffs, and even tank swap debuffs. Hopefully these changes will make the frames a bit more usable for healers, although I am personally still concerned about the lack of any mention of filtering. For example, if you don't have a poison dispel, then seeing poison debuffs on the frames just adds visual clutter and increases mental load. This is an area where the devil is in the detail, of course, and it will be worth a closer look once the promised updates do make it to the test realms. My other personal worry is how Blizzard's encounter design is going to adapt to the new add-on free world, as this is going to be uncharted territory for the designers, and that's something that could have a major impact on tuning. Nerfing things into the ground to unlock broken bosses is easy, but it's going to be very unsatisfying for us as players. But on the other hand, if Blizzard make the encounters too easy out of the box, there is no fixing that once the guilds have cleared the encounters. But that's not really what this video is about. I will later on be doing a full add-on survival guide running through how to prepare for the transition and how to cope post-launch. so do subscribe for that. In the meantime, I would love to hear your thoughts on what add-ons you don't want to lose, or even are you making the jump to a zero add-on user interface? Just let me know down below in the comments. And if you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My links in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.